Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, January 8th. In a press conference yesterday, Donald Trump declared he would use economic force to make Canada the 51st state.
Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No, economic force, because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada. But here's the problem with Canada. So many friends up there. I love the Canadian people. They're great. But we're spending hundreds of billions a year to protect it. We're spending hundreds of billions a year to take care of Canada. We lose in trade deficits. We're losing massive. We don't need their cars. You know, they make 20% of our cars. We don't need that. I'd rather make them in Detroit. We don't need the cars. We don't need their lumber. We have massive fields of lumber. We don't need their lumber. We have to unrestrict them because stupid people put, restrictions on, but I can do that with an executive order. We don't need anything they have.
The incoming U.S. president also said he'll be imposing substantial tariffs against Canada and Mexico when he returns to the White House. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau quickly responded to Mr. Trump's comments, saying, quote, "There isn't a snowball's chance in hell that Canada would become part of the United States. Workers and communities in both our countries benefit from being each other's biggest trading and security partner." And NDP leader Jagmeet Singh called Mr. Trump, quote, "an internet troll."
Donald Trump is acting more like an internet troll than a president of the United States. I don't think that's the way you act as a president, and it's certainly not the way you interact with other countries. But as I mentioned, I've dealt with bullies throughout my life, and I know what it's like. Even if you're the smaller guy, even if you're outnumbered, you got to make it not worth the bully's while. Bullies only understand strength. They only understand strength and pain. So you have to make sure you're standing up and showing that if you want to take that decision to fight with us, to pick a fight with us, it's going to hurt you too.
But Jagmeet Singh didn't stop there. In an interview with a U.S. online outlet, the NDP leader called for retaliatory tariffs against the United States.
I want to issue a challenge actually on your show today. For anyone that's running for prime minister, I've committed that Canada would respond with retaliatory tariffs. If Trump imposes tariffs on Canada, we should respond with tariffs. That's how you respond to a bully. You got to respond with strength. So my challenge is for anyone else out there who's running to become prime minister, I want you to also commit so that Donald Trump knows that anyone in Canada who gets that position will respond with a tariff, with tariffs in kind, fighting fire with fire, showing that we're ready to stand up to a bully.
And Ontario Premier Doug Ford continued his U.S. media blitz, appearing on Fox's Primetime with Jesse Waters.
What's your problem with the United States absorbing Canada?
Well, first of all, Jesse, I love the U.S. I love Americans, and I get it. President-elect Trump is a real estate tycoon. He's made billions, but that property's not for sale. As simple as that. But I have a better idea, Jesse. Why don't we create Fortress Amcan and make sure it's the richest, wealthiest, most prosperous jurisdiction in 2 countries anywhere in the world? We have the critical minerals, we have the energy, we have the electricity that America needs. And there's only one place I'd want to sell it to, and that's the U.S.
Premier Ford again emphasized that Americans don't have a problem with Canadians and that the real problem is China.
That has a problem with Canada. Do you know what the problem is? China's the problem. China is shipping in cheap parts into Mexico, and then Mexico slapping a Made in Mexico sticker on, shipping it up through the U.S. and Canada, costing American and Canadian jobs. Like, Mexico has to make a choice, Jesse.
I get
They're
it.
either with Beijing or Washington.
No, I get it.
British Columbia's Premier David Eby says he and his counterparts from across Canada will take leadership in the fight against threatened tariffs from Donald Trump.
As part of a unified Canadian response, I will be joining with the premiers this week to discuss our Council of Federation response, as well as our plan to visit Washington, D.C. To lobby the new government in the United States, as well as governors. I've also been engaging with my counterparts south of the border, as have, I know, businesses in the province.
Mr. Eby told a news conference in Vancouver on Tuesday that the tariffs are totally unjustified and that the issues at the border can be addressed without such duties. All right, stay tuned. Up next, Justin Trudeau calls for an in-person meeting with premiers to address U.S.-Canada relations. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called for an in-person meeting with premiers in Ottawa next week to address Canada's relationship with the United States. Mr. Trudeau and the premiers have met virtually twice since November to negotiate a response to Mr. Trump's threat to slap Canada and Mexico with 25% import tariffs the day he takes office. The threat is now imminent, with Inauguration Day less than 2 weeks away. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is set to be in attendance for the funeral of former U.S. President Jimmy Carter on Thursday. His office says he'll deliver condolences on behalf of Canadians and reaffirm the close ties between the two countries. Mr. Carter died December 29th at the age of 100 and served as president from 1977 to 1981. Last Friday, the Prime Minister wrote on X that Mr. Carter worked to make the world a better place. Liberal MPs gathered in Ottawa today for a national caucus meeting. It was the first meeting since their leader of nearly 12 years announced on Monday that he'll be stepping down. Today's gathering was originally set to last 6 hours to give MPs time to discuss Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's previous refusal to resign. But the focus was shifted to the party's next step in search for a new leader who can hold their own against popular Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. The Ukrainian military says that it struck a fuel storage depot deep inside Russia. Today's strike, 600 kilometers east of the Ukrainian border, caused a huge blaze at the facility that supplies a Russian air base used by aircraft that launch missiles into Ukraine. Moscow officials acknowledged a major drone attack and fire in the area. A 38-year-old Quebec woman is facing charges for allegedly abandoning a newborn shortly after giving birth outdoors on New Year's Day. A police spokesperson said that officers found the baby around 3 p.m. on January 1st after they were picked up by people who stopped to help. The baby was only in the cold for a few minutes, but remains under observation in a Montreal Children's Hospital. The director of a Quebec homeless shelter is urging empathy, saying that the woman was experiencing homelessness and she did not know she was pregnant. A strike that was looming to begin tomorrow at Ontario's 24 colleges has been averted, and classes will continue as scheduled this week. The bargaining agent for Ontario's 24 public colleges and the union representing 15,000 faculty members have agreed to enter into binding arbitration. The College Employer Council met this week in Toronto for mediation with the Ontario Public Services Employees Union. Last night, they announced that significant benefit gains were agreed upon, but outstanding matters will be resolved by an arbitrator. A second fast-moving wildfire has broken out northeast of Los Angeles just hours after another blaze tore through the city's wealthy Pacific Palisades neighborhood. The Palisades fire, whipped by extreme Santa Ana winds, started on Tuesday morning and continues to burn out of control. It has already destroyed many homes, and tens of thousands of residents are under evacuation orders. 40 kilometers to the east, another fire near Pasadena spread so rapidly last night that staff at senior care centers had to push dozens of residents in wheelchairs down the street to safety. New Orleans residents held the first parade of carnival season just days after a horrific New Year's attack that killed 14 people. The Joan of Arc parade was held just blocks from where people wept and laid flowers and crosses at the site of the truck attack. Politicians and outsiders have praised New Orleans' ability to bounce back after facing tragedy again and again. But many locals wince at praise of the city's resilience, saying that they're exhausted from enduring systemic problems and government failures. All right, stay with us. Coming up after the break, we'll have our weekly medical segment with Dr. Abhishek Rout, Medical Director at Appletree Medical Group. He and I will be discussing cases of humans contracting avian flu in both Canada and the U.S. and whether bird flu really poses a significant risk to humans. After that, we'll have more news from across Canada and around the world. Don't go anywhere. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. At least 66 people in the U.S. tested positive for bird flu during 2024. And on Tuesday, the first death of a person infected with the virus in Louisiana was reported, making 2025 the first year on record with a domestic human bird flu death. According to information from the CDC, infected birds spread avian flu through fluids like spit, snot, and feces. Other animals can get the virus and spread it via breathing in other organs and in bodily fluids like blood and milk. While health officials have stressed that the overall risk to humans remains low, concerns have been mounting of the potential for more widespread infections. I'm now joined by Dr. Abhishek Rout, Medical Director at Appletree Medical Group, to unpack this further. Dr. Rout, thank you for joining me today.
Happy New Year. Good to be here.
Now, what are the main symptoms that someone has contracted bird flu, and how are humans contracting it?
So the symptoms we typically see are fevers, cough, sore throat, runny nose, headaches, and fatigue. When we get more severe symptoms, you can get shortness of breath, severe respiratory illness, even sepsis and inflammation of the brain. So you can have a lot of severe symptoms with this as well. Now, humans catch bird flu through a variety of ways. The direct way is really when humans come in close contact with infected birds or their bodily fluids. And you will typically see this amongst poultry farm workers or backyard poultry keepers. There's also an indirect way. That's when you see humans coming in contact with surfaces that may be contaminated with the virus, like cages or feed or water or bedding. Now, there are some very small cases that you can get from inhalation, so it's in the air, and some very small cases where you can get from intermediate hosts, meaning humans catching the bird flu through contact with other animals who may have been infected, like pigs or other livestock. But most of the time, what we do see is the direct and indirect contact.
Now, what do we know right now about human-to-human transmission?
What we know is it's extremely rare, really. What we do see is there's a very small, limited cases, really a handful of document cases where we see human-to-human contact. Now, that doesn't mean it's impossible, and that doesn't mean it may not evolve to make that more prevalent. But so far, what we can say is the risk is quite low for human-to-human contact, and really keeping all the preventive measures in place that we already have, like hand washing, is quite helpful to prevent this from spreading any further.
Now, there have been some rather scary figures put out about the fatality rate for known bird flu infecting humans. What do you make of that figure?
Yeah, so when we look at the fatality rate, numbers released even by the WHO, when we look at the case fatality, we see a rate of almost 52%. So that is a lot. That's almost half of people contracting it passing away. What we do know is there's a lot of caveats to remember with this. So there's a lot of underreporting of mild cases. With many of the mild symptoms I mentioned, likely most people would keep that unreported anyway. There's also a severity of exposure. So the greater the severity and contact, the more likely of more severe illnesses. And then we should also keep in mind that there are variations by strain, and some strains of bird flu actually have much different fatality rates. Some are quite lower, in fact.
Now, health officials in Louisiana reported the first U.S. bird flu death, and Canada saw its first human case ever. Of course, these numbers are low, but how big of a worry is there that this will continue to spread?
Right, so it is very important to look at that first U.S. death. So that first human death from bird flu in the United States was reported in Louisiana, a 65-year-old individual with underlying health conditions, and there was a link to exposure of wild birds and backyard poultry as well. So what we are seeing in this case is what we expected based on the risk factors that we might see that this might be a more severe illness, which is very unfortunate, of course. I think overall we still see it as a low public health risk in general. I think the virus is not circulating amongst humans, but it is still doing the jump between birds and humans for the most part there. So I think the US and Canada are really actively monitoring the situation and ensuring that we're not seeing that change at this time.
Now, following COVID, anytime anyone hears of any sort of flu or illness, alarm bells start to go off. How important is it for people to practice proper hygiene, but also not panic about avian flu or just other illnesses?
Yeah, I think that's a great nuanced point there. So I think the first part is recognizing that proper hygiene is still very essential to preventing a lot of respiratory infections. So frequent hand washing is what we've talked about before. Regularly washing your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds will reduce the spread of germs. Respiratory hygiene, meaning covering your mouth and nose with a tissue or your elbow when you're sneezing, and then just keeping a bit of distance from people who are ill as well. Now, looking at avian flu or bird flu in general, I think we are seeing low transmission rates as well. We are seeing the primary spread from birds to humans. And so having that in mind, along with hygiene, is important because I think at this point, we are seeing a very low transmission issue.
Dr. Rout, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Ottawa's 2024 Fall Economic Statement, released late December, revealed that the government's deficit exceeded its own projections by nearly $22 billion. One component of this unexpected overrun was $3.5 billion in estimated losses related to COVID-era financial support programs. Sam Forrester from Canadian Affairs has covered the multi-billion-dollar loss and joined us to explain where questions remain.
As many Canadians are now aware, the fall economic statement showed a deficit for the 2023-2024 fiscal year that was roughly $21 billion larger than the $40 billion deficit that the government had pledged to be faithful to. Of that roughly 21 billion in new unforeseen deficit spending, 16.4 is allocated for contingent liabilities related to Indigenous lawsuit settlements. The remaining 4.7 billion is allocated for what the Department of Finance describes as adjustments for COVID-19 related support. That's the terminology they use in the fall economic statement. And there are basically two categories of adjustments. One of the categories is vaccine and therapeutic write-downs. So during the pandemic, the government spent a lot of money on medical interventions. And now that this inventory of product has expired, it's not worth anything. So this accounts for, again, 1.2 billion. The other category that remains is 3.5 billion for monetary COVID support, which can be further disaggregated into two categories, business and personal. So a portion of the 3.5 billion in COVID aid stems from loans provided to businesses during the pandemic under the Canada Emergency Business Account Program, which was administered by Export Development Canada. CEBA recipients were able to qualify for partial loan forgiveness up to $20,000 if the non-forgivable principal of their CEBA loan was repaid on or before January 18th of last year. And according to the EDC, out of the $49 billion in CEBA loans distributed during the pandemic, 8.1 billion remains outstanding. Just over 100 million has been already written off. But the exact breakdown of how much of the 3.5 billion loss relates specifically to CEBA business loans is not information that the Department of Finance was either able or willing to provide when I reached out for comment. Now, during the pandemic, there were also individual support programs. So the other component of the COVID aid loss, again, that's that $3.5 billion, comes from estimated overpayments to individuals under programs for people unable to work due to illness or caregiving responsibilities. Specifically here, we're talking about the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit, the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit, and the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit. So these were programs that were more targeted than CERB, which is what I think most Canadians are familiar with as the most prominent of those individual support efforts that the government made. Now, these funds were dispersed as grants rather than loans, but while eligible disbursements under these programs are not expected to be repaid, overpayments to individuals are identified as recoverable to some extent by the government. However, again, details on the scale or success of recovering these overpayments are not especially clear. Employment and Social Development Canada did not respond to requests for comment, nor did the CRA provide specifics on how they were ensuring repayment. They said that they're using an approach that's firm but fair. Again, details were not provided to Canadian Affairs.
One man's trash is another animal's treasure. A zoo in England is asking residents to donate their used Christmas trees to help enrich the lives of their residents, like their bears, elephants, and meerkats.
Thank you for donating all these thousands of Christmas trees that you can see are all around me. We're loving using these as animal enrichment, and all of the extra ones are going to be chipped, and those Christmas tree chippings are going to be used for enrichment and also as mulch.
Noah's Ark Zoo Farm in Bristol is now in its 5th year of asking for Christmas trees, which are often tossed in landfills following the conclusion of the holidays. They've diverted 15,000 Christmas trees from contributing to landfill waste, but the real joy is the Christmas spirit that it provides to their animals. I'm Teresa Skubik. Good night, Canada.